Hello, I am here to really briefly, and quickly go over the literary elements to fiction that you will be reading about, learning about, and writing about. So you're not going to write about each one of these, but you are going to learn about each one, and then you're going to choose which one you want to analyze in a specific story that you choose. So every story has all of these elements. The stories that are lined up with a specific element show that element in a particularly direct way, I think. That's based on my own interpretation as a reader. So you may have a different opinion, and that's totally fine too. So I have the syllabus in front of me. The first, of course, is plot. I attached another resource for you. It's basically about plot structure, the 5 elements of plot structure. Please review that and also read what your book has to say about it. Essentially, plot is more than just what happens, although that has a lot to do with plot. Plot is like, it's not just the sequence of events. It's not like you wake up and you go to work and then you come home. It's what happens that matters in between those moments on the timeline. And so plot can move in a very linear way or a very chronological way. Like a very straightforward plot would move through a day, for instance. But plot can also move back and forth through time. So the 2 story examples you have here, Flannery O'Connor's A Good Man is Hard to Find and James Baldwin's Sonny's Blues, are both examples of how a plot, of different plot structures. Sonny's Blues is written by the narrator of Sonny's Blues is telling the story of his relationship with his brother, and he's concerned for his brother. So the brother is the main character in a certain way, but of course, because we're seeing the world through Sonny is the brother, Sonny's brother's eyes, Sonny's brother is also the main character. And because we're seeing through his eyes, all we have access to are his memories. So the plot moves through time back and forth because we're learning about Sonny, we're learning about the family, we're learning about their history through Sonny's brother's thinking, his thoughts, his memories. So it doesn't move through time in a very straightforward or linear way. Flannery O'Connor's A Good Man is Hard to Find, however, is different, and it does move from beginning to end in a very traditional plot structure, narrative way. Having said all of that, I'd like to pull up the resource I gave you online. It's under fiction resources, and it's called Freytag's Pyramid. So it's essentially this person came up with this way of thinking about plot structure. Exposition is the first element. It's the beginning. It's when things start. So that's the beginning of the plot. Rising action is what happens as conflict builds, right? The rising action is when things are starting to build up to when we get to the climax, which is the height of the action or the conflict. Then we have falling action as things begin to resolve, and then in the end we have resolution. Those are the 5 elements. These elements can happen in that pyramid style, or they can happen sort of at different times. Like you could start with a resolution and then have the narrator be remembering the story in order as they explain how the resolution happened, for instance. All right, so that is the first element. The second element, character and point of view. So character and characterization are just like how the characters are developed and what we know about the character. This can have to do with their dialogue, the way they speak, the way they think. It many times has to do with the character's looks, like what they look like, where they come from, cultural influences, gender, race. All of that can add to our understanding of the character. You also have to understand point of view to understand character, because if you had someone describing another character from only their point of view, you would have to understand that if it's a first person point of view, right? If it's a first person perspective, then what you know about the character that the first person is describing is limited to how much you trust that character's perspective. So that's something to keep in mind too. Those two things should be kind of experienced and studied together, because point of view really does influence a lot of what we know about the characters. And always remember, when you have a first person character or narration, everything we understand is through that first person's eyes, the character's eyes, which means that if they are unreliable, if they're not honest, then everything we know about the world of the text is limited by that, right? You could also have a third person narration, an omniscient narrator, which is a narrator who sees all things and describes them kind of removed, in a removed way, and in a sort of factual, almost clinical way, right? You also can have a third person localized perspective where the writer is still writing in the third person, but they're understanding the descriptions of the world are still through one of the character's eyes. That would be a limited or localized third person view. And then you can have a second person narration, and that's when the character is speaking to the you. And often in the second person, the character is speaking to themselves. I don't think we have any second person point of view or perspectives for anything that we're reading, so you don't have to worry about that. That's less common, and you might see it in some sort of more experimental and creative pieces, but not in any of our stories. So that brings me to Girl by Jamaica Kincaid and The Harvest by Amy Hempel. Girl by Jamaica Kincaid is, well, it's kind of actually a dialogue between two people, between the girl and the person talking to the girl. So the girl is written sort of to the second person, but because it's a dialogue, you understand that one character is talking to the other character. So it's not fully in second person. And the girl character does have an opportunity to respond. But what we learn about the character of both the speaker, the person speaking to the girl, and the girl herself is revealed from both of their point of views. And it's really an interesting way to track character, or it's an interesting story to track character in, because it's unique in that way. Then we come to The Harvest by Amy Hempel, which is not in your book. This is only online. If you Google The Harvest, you'll be able to find it. This is really interesting from the perspective of character and point of view, because it's a first person point of view. So the speaker, the character, the main character in The Harvest, is telling you the story. But as she tells you the story, she kind of tells you she's lying at different parts. And so this is what I mean about trusting the character. What we learn about the character through her point of view is that she's not really to be trusted, because she is lying, so that you do understand what she's been through. Again, it's a very interesting study of both character and point of view. Oh man, I forgot to include a story I really wanted to include. That's okay. Next time. If anyone wants to know what that story is, email me and I'll tell you. Okay, setting. Setting is fascinating, because we think of setting as being like geographical, like where it's the actual physical setting of the story, right? But setting can also be emotional. Setting can be mental. Setting can have to do with time. So like when something is set matters as well. So if I were writing a story about my life right now, which I kind of am, that's what my collection of essays is this. Yes, the setting is my life. So some of the essays are set in, 1991, when I was, however, like a kid, right? And the geographical setting would be where I lived at that point. But other of the essays are about right now. And so the setting is this, right? It's where I live now. It's this year, right? So setting, it matters, right? The essay I write about when I was a kid, the time setting and the geographical setting is going to be different. Also, when we think about how the emotional setting of a text interacts with the physical setting, we can come to some really interesting conclusions. So when you read The Lady with the Dog, you'll see that the setting and even the description of the physical surroundings really reflects the emotional setting of the story as well. It's kind of the setting itself is kind of in between spaces. It's set in a resort, so it's not really anyone's home. And the emotional setting between the characters is uncertain, right? It's uncertain, and it's even to some extent a little bit gloomy. And so when you look at setting and think about all the different ways setting can show up, look at how the geographical setting interacts with the setting of time, interacts with the emotional setting of the piece. And same with the lesson. That setting is very specific, and there are I wouldn't even say cultural. There are class considerations of economy and money and how certain people live who have money as opposed to people who don't have money, right? The lesson uses a specific neighborhood in a specific area to explore those sort of philosophical questions of haves and have-nots. So the setting is really important to both of those stories. Finally, we get to theme and symbolism. So basically theme is like the overall sort of lesson or message of a story. And symbolism is images. A symbol would be an object in a story that carries a deeper meaning, right? So in Nathaniel Hawthorne's The Scarlet Letter, if anyone's read that, the Scarlet Letter is not just the Scarlet Letter. It's not just the letter A embroidered on someone's shirt, on Hester Payne's shirt. It is also a symbol of her shame and of her pain. But then ultimately it's also a symbol of the pride of her ability to keep a secret and to raise her child well, right? So the symbols can change across the length of a story or the plot of a story. They always carry a meaning beyond what they are literally. So a symbol is often a literal thing that means something beyond what it is. When we get to poetry with imagery, symbolism and imagery are very, very linked in poetry, as in prose. But imagery is part of symbolism in prose as well, but we're going to mostly just focus on imagery within poetry. So the symbolism helps point to the theme of a text. So if the theme of a text is, of course, now I can't think of a single example. Well, we'll table that. I want you to start to think about what the theme of these texts are. So, in fact, I'm really interested if anyone chooses to write about the very old man with enormous wings. This story has always kind of puzzled me. I love it. I think it's just a very strange, surreal, magical realism piece of writing. And who the person with the enormous wings is, what he's an angel in the story, but what does an angel even mean in this story? Those are all questions that could lead you to an understanding for your own understanding of what the theme and symbolism of the story is. The thing around your neck, also, the thing and the neck could both become symbols that unlock the theme. So I think that's all I want to say about that. Please read the sections in your book that go over all of this because they will do so more succinctly. Also, if you look, there are older videos on YouTube that I've made about these same elements. So please look those up as well if you are unclear about anything I've said here. Thank you.